The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Whitting. Well, today is part two of an interview with Robert Osgood. As we told you last week, he went through successful open heart surgery, but afterwards was administered IVs of Versed, a chemical to which he's highly allergic. He suffered a sustained cardiac arrest, multiple organ failures, a long-term 4-day coma, and he experienced a number of OBEs and NDEs. And so we welcome you back, Oz, to NDE Radio.
Well, good morning, Lee. Always a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you back, even on such short notice. I only got back to him last night, and this morning we talked about doing the show again. I appreciate your coming back on, Oz. Oz, maybe we could continue where we left off. You were walking a number of paths with Jesus, and tell us more about what you talked to him about.
Well, excuse the pause. I was looking at my map because that's all laid out in a sketch, just so that I can keep organized, because he shared so much with me.
Right.
So just to have some kind of organization of it all. What in particular, do you have any particular question?
Well, tell us about why there were different paths, why you think there were different paths, and did each path lead to a different kind of conversation?
The conversation changed as we progressed through there, and the scenery and the sounds I could hear were changing. It was like a constantly somewhat evolving landscape, and each path was a different part of my life. You know, that I had lived here on Earth. It started out with the younger parts and then moved up, through generations. Because off to the far right, that's an area I never got to fully experience, but it, I believe, was possibly past generations, how I got here. It's basically almost like a genealogy type experience.
So this was almost more like a very detailed, moment-by-moment excursion through a life review.
I guess in many ways you could look at that, although it wasn't totally about the review of life. It was the current life and a small glimpse of the future. Not really in detail because obviously, like we've discussed, the butterfly effect, if you know too much about the future, you could change it.
Exactly.
Obviously, that's not a goal that heaven would want to see, that, other than things that need to be changed, and that's the current status of the world. It needs to have some changes, and we all are aware of that.
So actually, the way you're describing this would be a very personal path or set of paths for you. Another individual might have a whole different map to draw.
I would imagine, but from a lot of what I've heard over the years since my NDE, several people mentioned the paths, and a lot of that has to do with life in the current, the path that you're on, because that was one thing that I was concerned about was, am I on the right path? And from my sense, just to get to where I arrived, I must have been doing at least something right. And he confirmed that with me that, as a human, I've made more than my share of mistakes, but I've always tried to correct them and do the right thing. That's how I was raised, obviously many years in the scouting program, to always try to tell the truth all the time, even if it doesn't seem like the right idea. I can tell you there's been many times in my life where I thought I might have to answer something in almost in a lie type format, but I said, all right, honesty is always the best policy. Let's stay with that and just take it as it goes.
Yes.
And yeah, there was sometimes honesty didn't have as good of an outcome as that I would have hoped to have had, but I did the right thing. And that's basically something that he shared with me, in that experience, is that, we're not perfect. We are going to make our mistakes, but you've tried, I've always felt remorse anytime I've made a mistake that inadvertently hurt somebody, their feelings or whatever aspect, and that I tried to make it right. That I realized, I stood up and realized that what I did was wrong. And it's like, I should have never done that.
Did you ask any questions of Jesus that you could share the answers to?
Well, a lot of questions. Obviously, my greatest concern, and it is my only fear that I can readily acknowledge, is I was basically more or less lived a no-fear type life. And naturally, everybody has some kind of fear, even if they say there's no fear. And my greatest fear was something bad happening to somebody I loved. That was a great fear. And I got talking to him about my daughter that I just cherish. She's my only child. And that was when he was telling me about the need to go back. And he said that I would need to go back, and I still had a lot less to contribute and accomplish, and plenty of quality time sharing my love with my grandchildren, which puzzled me. At that point, it puzzled me, and it puzzled me for some time after that, because I had a grandson at that time. I didn't have grandchildren, and now I do. So, he gave me that glimpse ahead, that despite, even though it looked like I was going to have this grandson, that there was grandchildren in my future. And he was spot on. Obviously, I now have two grandsons I cherish.
Now, you'd mentioned, I think, that he had said that you were in your universe, and you speculated that perhaps there were other universes as well. Were there any follow-up questions to that? Did you learn any more about the structure of things?
Well, the way that the experience ended, before I departed there, came back through the tunnel for the final trip, and back to my physical shell, a place where I really didn't want to be because of the agonizing pain. But he did, we talking about the universe as it stands right now, it's massive as we know, but one thing he shared with me, and NASA has gone on to confirm that with the Hubble telescope, the Alexandra. They've got a couple dozen deep space spacecraft out there seeking further out. That's obviously NASA's goal, is get far out in space as they can. They've now found, years ago they said there were hundreds of other galaxies. Then they changed it to thousands. And now they say there's hundreds of thousands of other galaxies. And that coincides exactly with what he shared with me, is God's just getting warmed up. For the longest time, NASA believed that the universe as physical size was either stable or somewhat shrinking, and they've changed that completely to the fact that it's expanding, and it's expanding rapidly.
Right,
and that's combining all the data that they're getting back from the Hubble, the Alexandra, the X-ray equipment, the infrared equipment that's out there. They combined it, and they were quite shocked that it's not shrinking, it's not stable, it's still growing.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Oz. Did you get any inclination or indication that there is reincarnation, or that you'd lived past lives? And if so, what did you learn about that?
I've been asked that question by quite a few people, and from what I experienced, I didn't get any direct indication of reincarnation. I can neither confirm or deny it. Many people obviously fully believe in that. That's fine, because even I can't argue it at all, because I've had deja vu moments over my lifetime of places I've never been, but I knew what they looked like before I got there, and I'd never seen a picture of it. And I knew I had to make a left turn, and I'd never been there. So that's what can I say about it? I can neither confirm or deny it, but it's quite possible, yes.
I was wondering if some of those paths that maybe the one you said you didn't get onto was a path of past lives.
I don't know, because, like I said, I didn't get to experience it.
Didn't get there. Yeah.
It was far off to my right, and like I said, the landscape there was kind of more flat than all the other areas we'd been, and there were some rocks, there was sand. So maybe it went to an ocean or a lake or something off further to the right, but I didn't get to go there.
Do you think the what you saw landscape-wise, whether it was fertile and green or had flowers, or whether it was dry and rocky, indicated something about not only the period in your life, but the kind of conversation you were going to be having as well?
It may have. That's something that's puzzled me in the 3.5 years since, is why the change in scenery. Did it correspond with what was happening? And that gets me back to the time puzzle that I'm still in to this day. Why did it change? Or is it just the natural landscape that was already there? I don't know. That's something that I'm determined to hopefully someday figure out. You've got to know me well enough that I'm a very determined man as far as trying to find the answers.
Oh, yes, for sure. Well, one of the guests that I had on a past show, and I've mentioned her before, said that she learned from her guide that the scene she was walking through had actually been designed specifically for her, that it was kind of an individualized gift to make her feel comfortable and to enable this moment on the other side before she came back to her body. And so if every one of these scenes is personalized, it's I mean, think of the care, the thought, God's thought that went into doing something like this.
Well, without question, one thing we've always been taught to believe, and I reinforce that completely, is that nothing is impossible with God. I mean, obviously, incredible power. And so that's quite possible. Maybe every individual that crosses over, it's tailored differently per that individual, It's still, I mean, even when I look at it from that angle, it still kind of puzzles me because it wasn't what I expected. If it had been tailored specifically for me, then it would have fit my pre-derived conception of what I would see in heaven, but it didn't. It exceeded it tremendously. I mean, off the chart type accession. I mean, way over.
And you had mentioned that you'd seen people along the way. Tell us a little about who you saw.
Well, obviously, my family had questions immediately. Naturally, they knew I had that experience, and they wanted to know, who did I see? Did you see this person? Did you see that person? I saw so many people that, whether I saw a long grand uncle or a great-great-grandparent, I don't know, because everybody I was seeing that I was aware of who they were looked completely different. That they were at a younger age, or what I like to call it the median age or the peak age, which is apparently how the younger appear and the older appear at a medium, somewhere in between, probably, I'm guessing, because I didn't ask ages, 25 to 35, our peak, the peak in life. And that's, the one person that, to this day, I'm so tremendously happy that I got to see, besides Jesus, obviously that was exceptional, was my mother, who had passed away years before my NDE. But I didn't immediately recognize her because I remember her. She passed from Alzheimer's. She was in her upper 70s and frail and very aged. The disease had aged her, significantly. She looked more like probably in her late 80s or 90s, before she passed. And the lady I was seeing was this probably mid-20s, thick blonde hair in ponytails. My mother, when she passed, had thin gray hair. And what puzzled me, even at that moment, as I'm walking by, I look out of the corner of my eye, and that lady blew me a kiss. My mother always did that. And then it dawned on me. I wanted to stay, and everybody says, well, a lot of people are kind of like, well, why would you want to stay there when you love so much back here? And I said, well, you have to be there to really try to get a grip on that. It's hard to explain that to anybody because, I mean, I love and cherish my family and my life here on this earth. But there, it's just so incredible in the way that you feel. You feel like you're home. A lot of people refer to it as home. I can't say if that's...
Did you have a chance to talk to your mother or anyone besides Jesus?
No, I didn't have the luxury of doing that, and obviously I would have loved to, because this is at the point where he's stressing the need. It was never I must go back, it was that I need to go back. So it was more or less just a quick glance, and probably if I'd been given that opportunity to talk to all these people, I wouldn't have came back at all. And he may have seen that as problematic. You know, if we share this kind of adventure while he's here with him, he's not going to go back, and he needs to go back. Because for some people, apparently it's an option. You know, that's my understanding of it from everything I experienced, because I was there more than once, and it was almost like he wasn't being frustrated that he's back again. It was just that every time I went back to the body, I was in terrible condition, and I did not want to be there. I was so much happier on the other side.
Now, you did go back and forth, so what was that like? Do you remember the passage each time, or were you suddenly back on the path, from your body to the path and from the path to your body?
Each transfer seemed to increase in speed and a shorter duration. It did seem like I was there much easier, but I imagine I must have went through that tunnel back and forth every time, but it was now something I was getting accustomed to doing, so it didn't seem so like, wow, I'm just moving at an incredibly high speed through this tunnel. Now it was like almost like you said, instantly there, but it wasn't instantly. It took some time, and it was much easier to do.
So with practice, we could jump back and forth conceivably, much more easily, much faster, and maybe, if you could train yourself to do it, maybe you wouldn't even have to go through a horrible near-death experience in order to gain that kind of access.
That's a possibility that has been discussed. I've seen it in conversations online. Some people say that they can do that, and perhaps they can. I can't confirm or deny if they can. I haven't gotten that ability to do that, and maybe someday I will, maybe someday I never will until I cross for the final time. I don't know. All I know is things that were happening to me in my life before the NDE are now happening at an exponential rate, especially something we've talked about in the past, ADCs. I haven't had any follow-up OBEs, but the ADCs are actually troubling in a sense, because I haven't found a way to turn it off or turn it down.
And who have these conversations been with?
Well, that's the big problem I have with it, is I can't figure. I don't recognize the voices as somebody I know. Sometimes I'm hearing children, like a younger child, probably 10-ish, girl and a boy, conversing. That's why sometimes I don't like to go to a large public place, because that gets worse. Obviously, times I've gone to hospitals. That's a place where that'll happen a lot, so I keep moving away from where the public's gathering, because it can get troublesome. It's like you can't shut it off. I still hear anybody else talking to me, but I'm hearing other things, and when no one's talking to me at that time.
Now, there are psychological conditions that can cause the same effect. Are you convinced that it's after-death communication, or is this a question in your mind?
I don't have any other explanation for it. If it's a psychological problem, then it may be. I'm not trained to make that evaluation. I have had some psychological help in the past by, just the fact that I'd had the death experience that was recommended. And at the final session, she said, "You're the most sane patient I've ever talked with." So because even I was wondering at the time, I said, "Am I losing it somehow in a small way?" Because I was always trained to go through the HTF, process, hypothesis, theory, and fact, and I was stuck in the hypothesis theory mode, and it's like, I can't confirm some of this as a fact, and that was bugging me, because I won't stop until I can. That's how when I grew up through science and biology classes, that's how I was trained. So
one of the things that people talk about, especially spiritualists, is that we're surrounded by ghosts, call them spirits of people who've died but did not go on into the light, and they can invade, through techniques like Ouija boards, and they can sometimes find a way to communicate with someone who's open to it. Have you tried addressing the voices you hear and asking for coherent conversation?
Yes, but I've gotten no positive results. I've never been on a Ouija board of any kind.
Well, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't know that they're very good.
No, that's not something I want to undertake. It's not on my list of things to do. I have heard of them. I've seen movies where a Ouija board was used, and so be it. If that's what they want to do, that's up to them. But it's not something that I want. And like some people have suggested, regressive hypnosis, and that actually does present me with a little fear, because not because I would get to experience the experience again. I would love to, but that it may recreate the cardiac arrest. That's the problem. If you're going to go back to that state that you were in at the time, obviously I was clinically dead, and no, that could be my last trip over. A one-way trip this time instead of the two-way, a return trip. So that, I don't know. I just don't dare do it.
Right. I wouldn't think that it would trigger a heart attack, but I'm not a doctor. Don't plan to play one on the radio either. So,
well,
what else can you tell us about your conversations with Jesus?
Oh, it's just like you've said in the past. All the questions were answered. So everything that I was so overwhelmed there. It's like, wow, what do I ask? What is this ultimate question? And I had so many of them, So I had tried to address as many things as I could. At the same time, he's trying to stress that I need to go back. So it was kind of like a give and take scenario going on. It's like, well, some of the answers he gave me were intentionally, I think, vague. In other words, he wouldn't clarify, because maybe it's because of, if he clarified, it would once again be hard to get me to go back.
Right.
It was an option.
Do you think that some of the answers you were given you don't remember because they were purposely, that memory was taken back or taken away from you?
As far as I know, none of the memories have vanished. As far as my ability to recall, they're a direct memory, and they have to be triggered. Something will trigger them if the right question's asked. Because since you and I've met, that's helped out. You've taken a very small cork out of a very large bottle. You've helped that flow to the point it was overwhelming me before you and I got the chance to meet, and now it's overwhelming me that much more, because it wants priority, in a sense, on everything I do. I'm not getting a whole lot done, accomplished in other directions, because those memories are now flowing all the time. And that can have its good points, and clearly it's not so good points. And that's what's happening. It's not. It's totally encompassing me and engulfing me, in a sense. I can still function. I'm still getting stuff done, but I'm way behind. I know one of the questions I would ask if I were there would be, why do we go through this process of living a life primarily based in ignorance when heaven is available to us and we could be there instead? Well, that's been something that I've along that same line that I've wondered myself, and especially when so much knowledge is there, unquestionably. And why don't we get that chance to have that knowledge back here. And it's all in due time. I mean, the fact that we are gaining knowledge, it is, the NDEs alone are being researched, obviously, in scientific approaches. And they're coming up with bits and pieces of the answers. So it's something that eventually we'll have a much better grip on. There's no doubt about that. Just technology alone is helping us in many ways.
Do you feel that were there any indications that we get judged at the end of our life for whether we lived a good life or a bad life?
Well, that Judgment Day is more or less in a sense. I mean, because I've had people ask me, did you experience a judgment type scenario? And I said, well, that in my sense is the time review. That is judgment, because I saw everybody who says, well, when this happened, my entire life flashed before my eyes. And yes, my entire life flashed before my eyes, but not like a flash. I saw the whole thing played over again. And that's where I have such a problem with the amount of time. The time is some kind of time warp when you're there. Right? That unquestionably, I'm convinced of that. I call that a fact. I've run it through that process so many times. I said, man, there's no way if I'm looking at my medical records that this amount of time here on Earth matches the amount of time I spent there, because it's a multiple, huge multiple.
And Oz, let me ask you too, how do you feel that this experience has changed you since you've come back?
Oh, just in so many ways. Obviously, as you know, physically, it's had a downside to it in the change. I'm still disabled, still recovering. As you know, I had the recent brain surgeries, but those brain surgeries were directly a part of what caused the NDE. If I hadn't had that cardiac arrest, they would have never found the aneurysms in the brain, the ticking time bombs up in the brain. So it was necessary. As bad as everybody would look at a cardiac, wow, that's terrible. You had a cardiac arrest. You're so blessed to be back. And I said, well, if I hadn't had that cardiac arrest, they wouldn't have found these aneurysms, and I wouldn't be here possibly telling you this story.
And has your wife, Tammy, noticed differences in your behavior since you came back?
Oh, nonstop, I would have to say. Just in everything I do is the small things in life that I would have probably not paid much attention to at all or totally ignored, I'm paying attention to. And the bigger things in life, the bigger problems don't seem to bother me as much. Years ago, I would be troubled by it and, trying to find that solution. And now it's like, it is what it is, It's changed my attitude and the way I perceive everything completely. Even I, at times, don't recognize the changes that I'm undergoing. It's an ongoing process because it isn't over. I'm not done changing.
Well, Robert, I guess once again we are out of time here on NDE Radio. It does go quickly, doesn't it?
Well, it's always a pleasure, and I'm honored just to be here and get the chance to share this with you.
Well, you keep working on your book, and I want to thank you, Oz, for sharing more of your NDE experience with us today. If the listeners would like to catch this show again, and I would urge them to listen to part one of this interview, which they can find on our past shows button at TalkZone. So just go to our website at nderadio.org, and for more information about the work of IANDS, check out that website, iands.org. And tune in next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.